Welcome to episode 7 of the Hack Circus podcast. Hack Circus is a quarterly event series and magazine all about fantasy, technology and everyday magic. Have a look at hackcircus.com. In this episode I speak to Nick Davies, a hypnotist and hypnotherapist. Nick actually puts me under a hypnotic trance in several sections of this show, so I've had to edit out some of the induction, both so as not to trigger listeners and also to protect his methods. But I think you'll still get a good sense of what went on. Oh, this feels quite high now.
Yeah.
Oh, I see what you mean, yeah. Wow.
Yeah, so I want you to kind of get an idea. So it's windy here,
yeah.
roads on the side.
Yeah, it's kind of okay so far. You can't, I mean, you can see quite far. We're about the same height as the multi-storey car park.
Yeah.
It's parallel to us and we're near Moore Street. It's actually quite enclosed this, so it doesn't feel too bad, but I'm not very happy about I feel my feet are a bit shaky on it feels like the floor's not safe.
Yes,
like it's not,
there's some movement, isn't there?
Not keen on that.
Yeah. Some moving traffic below.
Yeah. We're at the big bulbous Selfridges building in Birmingham, and I'm just kind of looking, yeah. I mean, it doesn't feel good. It's not too bad. Actually, even though mentally I feel like I'm fine, my legs are going a bit.
Yeah.
So obviously there's something going on.
So we've got that feeling. Is there anything anywhere else? Any other feelings, experiences, pictures in your head?
I feel like my muscles are tensing sort of involuntarily in my arms and chest and stuff.
Yeah, good.
I'm here with Nick Davies, a hypnotist and hypnotherapist from Coventry, and we're meeting in Birmingham partly to test my fear of heights and to try and overcome it a little bit, but also just have an interesting chat about hypnotherapy and hypnosis. It's lovely to see you again, Nick.
Hello, how are you?
I'm fine. I'm feeling a little bit wobbly because we're sat right on the edge of a quite high drop. But I've sort of done that deliberately to test myself. Nick, maybe you should introduce yourself and your work.
My name's Nick Davies and I'm owner and director of the Warwickshire School of Hypnotherapy. And for what I specialise in, I tend to take the worst cases on that other therapists can't actually deal with. And I specialise in things like post-traumatic stress disorder, trauma, phobias and things like that. And what's interesting about today is, obviously you've told me about this experience you had on a cable car. And what interests me is that sometimes some of the worst experiences we have that create traumas, for me, are some of the easiest things to cure. When you understand how the brain works and how it stores traumas and fears and things like that, there's a great body of research now, mainly headed by a chap called Dr. Peter Naish, who was looking into functional fMRI scans, and what they're saying now is that people who have these kind of phobic traumatic responses to stimuli actually are in a state of hypnosis. So and what actually happens, they're saying that the brains are actually responding as if the people are already in hypnosis when they experience this trauma. So for me that's fascinating, because if somebody's already in a hypnotic trance, it saves me having to do an induction and things like that. So what people don't realise is that when they're experiencing this trauma, this phobia or whatever else, it's a really great opportunity for them to cure it. So that's what we're here today to do.
Can you tell when people are in a slight hypnotic state? You said to me before that people slip in and out of trances all day, and you can sort of see it a little bit. I think anyone can kind of pick up on that. But are there particular sort of physiological things you notice about people when they're in these, as you say, like programmed states, I suppose?
Yeah. I mean, it's incredible. You can spot it really easily, and that's the hallmark of a real trauma, where you get this. The best way to describe it would be to imagine that you've seen a ghost, and you really believe you've seen a ghost. That kind of shocked face where somebody's completely pale, their eyes are really, really wide. It's almost like what you would call a rabbit in the headlights look. So, which ironically is what they call animal hypnosis, where animals freeze, and so do human beings. And if we look at psychologically, I've researched this quite a lot. Why on earth would we go into these states of freeze and this hypnotic state? So I believe hypnosis for me is something that has been created in the body for us to heal ourselves. So whenever we go into these trance-like states, it's an opportunity for us to make changes, but often they're misused, and what happens is your friend will say, oh, don't be so silly, you'll be freaking out on the cable car, the fair ride or something like that, and often that's the worst thing to do, because when you say to somebody, oh, don't be so silly, not only does it kind of discount your feelings and trample all over them, but it actually changes the mindset that you're in from this hypnotic trance state to go into the rational mind. And when we're in this rational mind, where the rational mind would say, I shouldn't be scared of spiders, I shouldn't be scared of heights, we know this, but this part of our mind won't influence the other part of the mind, the unconscious mind, to change it. So it doesn't matter how intelligent you are, how rational you are, it won't change that behaviour. So telling somebody they're being silly or stupid or something like that doesn't change it. And that's where I come in, because when I see that trance state and I see that person with that glazed over look and they've gone inside, and with trauma victims, what actually happens, and from the London tube bombings, I think it was 2007, that was it, 7/7, what happened is the researchers that looked into that were doing the fMRI scans, and they were saying that when the people revivified the experience, they actually believed they were there. So they'd be sitting in Starbucks or wherever they were talking to somebody, and when they had these revivifications and these experiences, they felt they were actually on the tubes once again. So it's a state of hypnosis, and it's no different to what I do as a stage hypnotist, which I am as well. That when I get people on the stage to believe that they're sitting down on a beach and it's really hot and this, that and the other, and you actually see the people feeling hot and getting those experiences. So it's no different to that. So, and that's why I'm a big advocate that when I've studied hypnosis, I've studied it all the way from stage hypnosis, where I've done 50 shows, all the way through to hypnotherapy and psychotherapy, the full spectrum. People are often scared to mix the two, but I think that's a mistake, because the two are intrinsically linked, especially where trauma is concerned.
I mean, I've read a bit about hypnosis, and I mean, I don't know very much, but I did read something recently that was saying, actually it was a hypnotherapist saying that they often get asked from people who've had traumatic experiences to sort of erase or reprogram their memory in some way, and actually this hypnotist was saying, I don't do that, because, or generally it's incredibly complicated to do that, because a memory is not a sort of computer memory that's just been laid down in fact. It's an emotional experience that changes over time, and it's connected to all these other things. If you take one out, then everything else that it's linked to in your brain is going to... What do you think about that?
Well, I tell you what, I'm glad you said that, because I don't believe that at all, and I specialise in trauma, and let me tell you, yes, I can erase memories. And I'll say that unequivocally, because I've done it hundreds of times, and I've created a technique called the blast technique, which is basically from the words bilateral analysis and stimulation technique. But what's happened with these brain imaging scans, what they're finding is the trauma is trapped in the right side of the brain. Normally, when we experience something like a normal fear, the memory goes into the right side of the brain, the global or the artistic side of the brain, passes through a structure called the corpus callosum, which is the information superhighway, it's known as, then into the left side of the brain, which is the logical detail part of the brain, and then back again, and then stored in both hemispheres in the brain. And what they found with these fMRI scans is that actually with trauma victims and phobia victims, what happens is that the memory is not processed through the corpus callosum, and it stays in the right side of the brain. So this memory, the way it's stored, what I found is with the blast technique that we're going to be doing in a short while, is what it can do, it can process the memory. So if, when I deal with the worst kinds of trauma victims, I'm talking about sort of child abuse, rape, people who've been attacked, people who've been in the Gulf War, things like that, people who've seen and experienced some horrific things. And I'm curing these things in minutes rather than hours. And the reason is they're permanently cured as well, because I set a challenge to anybody that's worked with me that if ever they get it back, they can come and see me again free of charge. And in my 9.5 years experience, nobody's ever come back in and asked for another session. And so what actually happens is, yes, these memories are processed. And let me give you an example of one of the cases I initially dealt with when I first started. There was a lady who'd had a horrific experience. I won't go into any detail, but it lasted for about 3 weeks. And the lady said to me, whenever I think about it, it's like it's happening to me again. I'm actually there, I can feel it, I can see it, and I can hear it. So it was a very, very disturbing experience. So when I used the blast technique on her, which I created, what she said was at the end of it, and she said to me, it was almost like, she said, those really dark pencils you get in art classes at school? She said initially it was like somebody had scored that into the paper in my mind. So it was so dark and it was really etched into this thing, so I couldn't get away from it. And she said the best way of describing it is that what you did is you took a massive eraser and rubbed it out. Now, she said, I know the experience happened because there's a faint outline of that experience, but it's so far away now that it doesn't affect me. So that's the best way to explain it, I guess.
So how do you stop yourself getting affected by listening to people's traumas all day? This must be upsetting for you. Do you have sort of techniques that you can use on yourself as well?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because I'm a big advocate of eyes open hypnosis. You don't need to close your eyes to hypnotise anybody. And if we think about it, we've just walked through Selfridges and we've seen teams of people being influenced by the cosmetic industry. There are massive amounts of money changing hands today because of the programming that people get from television and the media and things like that. So we're kind of in and out of hypnosis all day long. So yes, is there a way to protect yourself? Yeah, as soon as you know you're in a dreamy sort of blurry-eyed state, I can pretty much guess your brainwaves have gone from beta to alpha and you're in what we would call an eyes open trance state. So it means you're open to suggestions. Now let me just tell you how, for those geeks out there, hopefully there are a few listening, this is the best way on suggestions. Now if I go back to Star Wars, which was an incredible film for me when I was a child and a number of other people. Now, if you remember when Luke Skywalker had to put the missile into the Death Star to blow it up, the first thing they had to do is they had to get the shield for the Death Star down. So the shield to the Death Star is our sort of conscious, I call it the dormant of the mind. There's a dormant of a mind that, if you're arguing with somebody and they're trying to get the point of view over, people are adamant they won't receive that. So the dormant of the mind is there. And it's like that sort of shield around the Death Star. Now, what all hypnosis does, eyes open or eyes closed and influence, is we take the shield off. So we take that dormant away and it allows the suggestion in. But the suggestion needs to be so finely tuned, like Luke Skywalker had to fire a missile down the exhaust tube in the Death Star to make it happen. And this is exactly the same way as hypnosis. So firstly, you need to disarm your client with whether eyes open or eyes closed hypnosis. And then you need to make a suggestion that is finely tuned to enter the right spot. So we have another level of protection. So some people who won't let themselves be hypnotised basically will keep the dormant of the mind there. But what they don't realise is there's another level of protection. So if the dormant is the first level of protection where we can kind of frown and be a bit critical, the second level of protection would be the manager of the place that the doorman is protecting. So here we are in Starbucks. Let's assume there's a doorman on Starbucks to stop undesirable people coming in. So we move him to one side and let everybody in. Then we have the manager of Starbucks that would say, actually, I'm not going to take that person because they're undesirable. But the manager of the organisation is a lot cleverer than the actual doorman of the mind. So once we put the hypnotic suggestion in, there's another level where our unconscious mind will say, does this suggestion fit in with my values and morals and beliefs? Is it good for me? And what it will do is, if that suggestion is not good for us, it will kick it out. Now, the reason bad suggestions go in is because we have a level of our mind that says we need to protect ourselves. So if somebody puts a suggestion in that's driven by fear of harm or things like that, we will accept the suggestion. So if you notice, a lot of suggestions that advertising companies or the government will use to influence us are all driven by fear. If you look at life insurance policies, they'll be saying, imagine, you haven't got this level of cover and all your family's suffering. So there's a level of fear. Oh my God, what if I didn't do that? So we tend to buy it. When the cosmetic industry is driven purely by loneliness. It says if you aren't beautiful, on some level, a very subtle level, if you don't buy these products, you're going to be the one person that's lonely and doesn't get attention and doesn't get anything in life. So it's fear is a massive driver for influence.
Yeah, and I guess that explains why so many kind of really nonsensical, irrational things get stuck in people's heads as a problem when they're not a problem, and you live in a constant state of...
Now let me give you 3 levels of fear. The first level of fear that we're protected against is death. So if I said to you, the platform we're sitting on now, where we're looking down, is collapsing, we may die, I can guarantee that you'd probably give Usain Bolt a pretty good run for his money to get to the stairs. The second level of fear we have is for personal injury. So are we going to be maimed or disfigured or injured in some way that's going to affect our life? Those two make perfect sense to me. Now the third level of fear, and this is an irrational one, is embarrassment. And I've done a lot of research on this, and I'm writing a book called The Embarrassment Epidemic. Now what happens is people will do things to avoid embarrassment. No, it's crazy. Embarrassment is just pigmentation in the cheeks, a flushing, and some sweating, and some palpitations perhaps. So I researched this and thought, why on earth would we try and avoid embarrassment? So I did some more research, and I found out when we used to live in clans hundreds of years ago, what would happen is if we lived on our own, we would hunt and gather and fight neighbouring tribes and this, that and the other, and we'd have a fairly small chance of survival. So what we did is we procreated and we got to know other clans and other people. So a group of us, say 30 people, would work together to create housing, safety and protection and things like that. So we were safe in that unit, but what happened is if you were ever ejected from that clan, your chances of survival would massively diminish. So what happened is we're actually hardwired that whenever we behave in a way that will create something that will get us ejected from the clan, we have this hardwiring to make us embarrassed. So that's why standing up and being the tall poppy, saying, no, I disagree with this and doing this, creates embarrassment, because you having opinions that don't fit in with the clan could very well get you kicked out of the clan and then you would die. So it makes perfect sense.
And it makes sense in the sense of, you were asking me earlier about how Circus is going, and I was telling you about the next show, and actually one of the things, I think one of the reasons that I do things like this is because they are frightening, and you do worry that it's going to be exposing, it's going to be different, people might not agree, it's going to set you aside from everyone else. It's all about feeling embarrassed or ashamed or exposed in some way. It really makes sense. And the thing about death as well, somebody, one of the guys who always contributes to the Hack Circus stuff, tweeted the other day saying it was after we did the space show, which was about sending people into space on a mission to investigate an alien signal, and I was kind of going, well, let's just leave them there, and of course we'll all have to say goodbye to Earth, and we'll never see Earth again, and we're going to be thousands of years into the future and all of this. And he said, one day, Leila, you'll do a show that isn't ultimately about the extinction of the entire human race. And he said, and then I realised we've done that again with the next show as well. I was like, oh, why do I keep... But it's that death thing again, I think. It's such an attractive theme because it's so sort of exhilarating and tunes into that fear response
thing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
and that's what we're trying to avoid every day in our lives. Our unconscious mind is protecting us from death, serious injury and embarrassment. And the great thing is, if you want to do something special with your life, and I think you and I are quite fortunate, we know some similar people who do some really cool things. These are the people who face embarrassment on a daily basis. And I said to myself a few years ago when I made this change, my previous incarnation was obviously in industry and the corporate world, and I did very well there. But since I left there, what I did is I've become really, really good at dealing with embarrassment and embracing those things. And I think, what is it that I want to do? What makes my heart race? What's likely to embarrass me? And I try and acclimatise myself to that, and then just do that. And what you find is you tend to do really cool things and live a happier, more fulfilled life. So when I work with my clients, I say, and particularly sports people as well, because obviously I'm a sports psychologist as well, and I've worked with people all the way up to GB and international level. And what I say to these people is, don't worry about what people think. Just only compete with yourself. And if it feels like you're going to be embarrassed, do it anyway. Because all it is a flushing of the cheeks, and the redness and the palpitations and a little bit of sweating. And it's not the end of the world. Your body is trying to tell you that you're going to die and you're going to be ejected from the clan. But the reality is nowadays you could live on your own in the world and get by really easily. I'm a big fan of people who go off grid and live in these little communes and live wonderful lives. I think there's a lot to be said for that. I was brought up, my dad worked with special needs children with behavioural difficulties, so from an early age I've always had an interest in psychology and human behaviour. And then what was interesting, going back to my previous incarnation when I was at British Telecom, and I ended up being national project manager. But what happened to me? There was a time back in '99, and I was working really hard. I was working about 60-70 hour weeks. So I was moving house. I think I was splitting up with my girlfriend at the time. When I look back, it was a crazy time, and I think, God, nobody would ever cope with that kind of workload. And then I collapsed. One day I got home, and I'd been gazumped on the house I was going to move to, so I had to live with mum and dad. And I collapsed, and I had every test known to man, and it went on for about 6 months. And the doctor said in the end, we can only put it down to stress overload. And at the time I was saying, no, it shouldn't be this, that and the other. But when I look back, I chuckled to myself how many plates I was spinning and how hard I was working. But it made perfect sense to me. So what I did is I sat in the library every evening and I tried to research what had happened, psychology, and I found different things. And what I wanted to do when I went for counselling, and the counselling was okay and stuff, about 20 sessions of that, and it furthered my interest in psychology, but it didn't work. And apologies to those counsellors out there, but it's a very inefficient way of trying to deal with things. And counselling goes under the premise that the person often has the answers to their own questions and challenges. That's not the case often, especially with traumas and phobias. So what I did is I researched the best ways to actually treat things, for myself and for others, and it became, a real passion, and I still, study every day. So with all this information, I decided to open my own business, so obviously the Warwickshire School of Hypnotherapy, and create my own technique, the blast technique, and other techniques to refine and speed up the ways of changing these things in a way that can be comfortable. Because when I went for counselling, what was not good for me is I was sitting in a chair with this very important person, and I really didn't know what was happening. And 20 sessions of this, I felt like a little boy, and I was like, let's go through this, that, and the other. And I felt the same at the end of the 20 sessions, and I was a few £1,000 lighter, to be honest. So I thought, hang on, there must be a different way. So what I've done is I've refined the process, and my belief is you don't have to, feel vulnerable and this, that, and the other. You don't have to have lengthy sessions. A lot of the stuff I do, I cure people in, either half an hour at most, or a few sessions, 4 sessions, or the more serious stuff with perhaps 12 sessions is the most I've ever seen somebody for. But whenever I see people, there's laughter, it's really relaxed and stuff like this, and I give people a good understanding of what's going on, so they leave and they actually enjoy the process, and why not?
I get very bored of people in the sort of science and tech and sort of ideas world having to be skeptical, and I don't think that's necessarily very helpful. And I'm really into kind of the power of belief, I suppose, to change what you're doing and how you live, and actually in making you much more sort of sensitive and better with other people. I don't know, there's something about belief that allows you to bridge those gaps with people. But I was just going to ask you about, what do you think the difference is between someone who is very suggestible and someone who's very difficult to hypnotise? Is there something you've noticed?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I specialise in is being able to hypnotise the unhypnotisable. Now, if we go back to the original analogy about the dormant of the mind, and this is what people will put in front of the mind, and what I tend to find with the scientific types, those people who go, I'm not going to believe this unless somebody in a white coat with lots of letters after their name tells me. Do you know the crazy thing is if I were to do a TED talk, let's say, and I wore a white coat, and they said, here's Dr. Davies with his PhD and all these interesting qualifications, and he's the expert on molecular science and this, that and the other, and people believe that I was this person and I had all this body of work, then were I to suggest something and then use some fictitious scientific research, all the science-based people in the audience would believe me, because so
believe in science.
Exactly. So it's how things are portrayed. Now, what people are scared of is they believe that if they don't have this dormant in front of the mind, protecting everything that goes in, they really believe there's no second line of defence, as in, the manager of the place, which is the unconscious mind. But we all have this. So those people are open. People think that people are open. Actually, they'll believe in this, that and the other. Actually, they're not. Their unconscious mind is filtering things out and is testing it day by day by day. So if something proves not to be good for that person, they'll chuck it out. So they actually have more experiences, richer experience and richer lives than those that don't. The irony is, these sceptical people who say they can't be hypnotised and have these rigid beliefs and this dormant of the mind, actually are sometimes the easiest people to hypnotise and sometimes the most suggestible. Once I've got rid of that dormant of the mind, trust me, they're the people that just will believe any suggestion that I put in. So often you'll find that these people become scientific and become critical because they've had this perceived gullibility or suggestibility in the past, and it's a fear-driven thing. So once you get past that dormant, and I'll be honest, when people set me challenges sometimes when I'm out or I'm doing a show or something like that, I'll prove with these people and get them doing all sorts of things, obviously in a moral way, but it's interesting. But I say, it's healthy to have a bit of scepticism. Running a hypnotherapy school, I've taught doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists, and people like that, so I have to be very up to date on the things I do. So a lot of the stuff I do, I back it with science. But however, I say to people, it's up to you. If you don't want to believe what I say and you want to go through the science, we'll do that. But it's going to take us a lot longer. That's fine. But other people come in with an open mind. We can just do it a lot more quickly. And I say, if it's a problem that you have and you want to shift, why not come in with an open mind? I would never go to my doctor and say, look, I've got a poorly knee, and he tells me I've got an operation, and I go into the operation going, it might not work, it might not. I think you can understand what the results from that operation would be. I mean, let's look at some real scientific research. A couple of years ago, there was a doctor that did a new form of back surgery, and basically there's lots of back surgery. I mean, back surgery is one of the biggest things that the NHS pays for, and it's a real strain on the NHS. And there was a doctor who said he found this new way, and what he did, he drilled into the spine under local anaesthetic, and he basically fused the spine together, or fused the vertebrae with a cement. Now, what happened, he said, was when he mixed the cement, the people in local anaesthetic, they had a real strong smell of this cement. It's a very pungent smell. It's very distinctive. Now, this doctor had a 98% success rate. And now, fair play to this doctor, because what he did one day is he actually fused the wrong vertebrae and put this cement into the wrong vertebra. And the client still got the result. And I mean, if you do a search, I can't remember the name of the research, but it was 2 years ago. So what he did, he actually did a placebo effect trial with a blind trial. So 50%, the computer would decide who got the proper cement and who didn't get the cement. The other one would get saline solution. But he actually mixed the cement up with the people that weren't getting it, didn't put the cement in the needle, put saline solution so they could get the smell, they get exactly the same experience. Have a guess what the success rates were for saline and for the cement.
I guess the same.
98%.
Yeah. Wow.
So there's another book as well that I implore people to read with back problems, which I read. I remember I was actually in a wheelchair from having sciatica once, and it was really, really bad, and the doctor said to me, you may not get some of the movement back in one of your legs. You've got basically a herniated disc. We've seen it on the scan. It may not go back in, this, that and the other. Anyway, so for me, being a boxing coach and doing weight training, things like this, I didn't want to accept that suggestion. So a few people I got in contact with, a few people, and they said, you've got to read this book. It's called The Divided Mind by Dr. John Sarno. And Dr. John Sarno is a back surgeon. And he goes through this book chapter by chapter, saying how the majority of back injuries, he said we all have herniated discs, we all have crumbling discs and hips and this, that and the other. And he goes through all this research where there was a woman with a hip, and they x-rayed a hip, and she was in incredible pain, and they said, yeah, your hip is, the bone is crumbling, we need to operate and put a new joint in, or whatever it was. Anyway, when they came to the operation, they went, actually, we've x-rayed the wrong hip. So they x-rayed the other hip, and the other hip was had less damage than the hip they x-rayed. So they couldn't understand why she'd have pain in one hip that was less worse than the other. So he looked into it, and he basically found out that what happens when we have things like unresolved grief, unresolved anger, unresolved trauma, unresolved sadness, that we trap this in our unconscious mind because it's so overwhelming that we're unable to deal with it consciously. So what the unconscious mind does, it's not psychosomatic illness, it actually creates mild oxygen deprivation to parts of the body to give us this pain. So I read through this book, 600 pages long, and I thought, I'm going to test this. So remember, I'm in a wheelchair for 2 days, so I've got some movement back after physio, but I'm in agony. So I said, right, my unresolved grief was I was having discussions about a contract with a sports organisation, and I'll be honest, it was a very big organisation, and I was intimidated, and I didn't want to tell them I couldn't do what they wanted me to do, and it was walking away from a very big contract, but it wasn't right for me. So with this in mind, I thought, right, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to face down my fear, I'm going to reject the contract, reject this thing, which is huge, and I know it's right for me, but I'm too scared to do it, so I did it. And then I got a skipping rope. And in my boxing training, if you've had a herniated disc, you'll know that skipping is the worst thing you can do for herniated disc. Now, when I finished the book, and I'd done some work on myself with suggestion, saying to myself that my unconscious mind could cure this sciatica, and it could, once it taken away the psychological issue I had, which was intimidation, and I felt quite vulnerable. So once I got rid of that, I thought, so the pain started to go, and I got this dull ache. And if I've got proper sciatica and it's a herniated disc, if I skip, I'm going to be back in a wheelchair. So it's a high-risk strategy. I had a few friends there, and a lot of people were sceptical, I have to say, but I believed in it 100%. I did 6 rounds of skipping, and I didn't have sciatica from that day. the kind of best way to get yourself into trance, if you want to do it for yourself, would be one that Betty Erickson, Milton Erickson's wife, created, where it's a focus of self-hypnosis, which you can do with your eyes open. So if you're sitting here in Starbucks, as we are, what you do is you focus on a point and you allow your eyes to glaze. Then what you do is, as you allow your eyes to glaze, you notice 5 things that you can see in your peripheral vision. Now, your foveal vision, which is what you focus on, is governed and controlled by your conscious mind. Your peripheral vision is governed by your unconscious mind, and there are lots of things that I can do to influence people with that, but that's another session. So if you look into your peripheral vision, you'll notice 5 things that you can see. So if I were to do it, I'd notice you, I'd notice the poster, I'd notice people in the coffee bar, I can notice people walking by, and I can notice the drop that's next to us now. Then what you do is you notice 5 things that you can hear. So it could be the baby talking, the sound, the hum of people, footsteps, scream from a child there, and just general noise in the background. Then what you will do is, if you notice, and you do this in a very relaxed fashion as you're completely focusing on that point and allowing your eyes to glaze over, then what I want you to notice is 5 things that you can sense. So it could be the pressure of your feet inside your shoes, the feeling of your legs against the chair. It could be the heat and the temperature in your face or your hands. And it could be the feeling or position of your arm, or maybe the feeling of one ear. And as you do these things, what will happen is your brain waves will slow and you'll slip into what we call an alpha state, and that will allow you enough leverage to receive whatever suggestion you want. And in the same way with an affirmation, you can change things, and you can say to yourself, I am more confident with my work, my self-esteem is growing day by day. So thinking about things, with affirmations, it's important to say what you want, not what you don't want. So if you were saying, I don't want to feel nervous, obviously the brain can't process negatives, because if I say to you, don't think of a blue bus, you'll think of a blue bus. So instead of saying, I don't want to feel fear, say, as I'm walking across the bridge, I want to feel calm, controlled and relaxed.
This reminds me of, because last time, when I first met Nick, it was a sort of magical meet-up in a pub in London, and Nick just kind of spontaneously started hypnotising me at the table. But it was great, and I felt really good afterwards. And it was this kind of process that we've just been probably triggering some of our listeners in a lovely way, I hope. I'm feeling much more confident since that last section of the show.
And I'll always get the result, because I understand how and why hypnosis works. I've even created my own version of hypnosis, how and why it works, called transactional hypnosis, which if you do a search on transactionalhypnosis.co.uk, that's my website for teaching that and explaining it, and there's a free report on there if you like. But it's about tailoring the experience. Hypnosis is a wonderful experience, and everybody can go into hypnosis. It's a myth that some people can't be hypnotised, but we need a reason to do it. And when you satisfy the criteria, if you think about it, hypnosis is like opening a safe. And the safe is where you keep your valuables, and your mind is where you keep your valuables. All the things that are valuable to you, your emotions, your fears, your vulnerabilities and insecurities. So why would you let somebody in? So what I say to people is, people will allow me the code to the safe when I get them to trust me and feel comfortable and they feel safe. And when those 3 things are present, I'll go in the safe and I'll be very, very respectful, and I will adjust the things that they want me to adjust, no more, no less, perhaps more. I like to give people more than they ask for. But then I'll close the safe again and leave that person feeling great. But also what I do is, the metaphor I use is, I don't go in that safe on my own. I don't want people to think when I work with them it's just me. I put people in complete control as well, and I say, listen, it's like, the film Inception. We're going in there together. Let's have a play with those things where you're controlling me, but I'm the kind of safe cracker. So I'll get us both in. Let's go into that experience. Let's change it. Let's make it exactly as you want it. And let's close it again and come out. And what a film, Inception.
Were you surprised by how powerful this is?
I think, initially when I was hypnotising people on the stage, and you get these incredible phenomena, people believing they're seeing things and feeling things and things like that. And then, therapy, when you're changing people in, that have had lifelong traumas in one session, it's incredible, and it feels, incredibly powerful. And you know, I guess for me, you know, being a Star Wars fan, it's the closest thing you can get to becoming a Jedi. So yeah, you know, it's a very good feeling. But you know, I guess with some people, it's, you know, it's going back to your intent again. You know, are you somebody who's going to go on the good side or the dark side? You know, and more often than not, you know, people become like Luke Skywalker and use it for the good. And yeah, and it's incredibly powerful. But for me, what troubles me a bit is how it's not more widespread, why more people aren't using it, and why it's not got more access. And I think, you know, for me, if you're going to work with somebody, the most important thing is that you create rapport with that person. You know, I mean, I'm not the sort of person that you'll see who you'd see in a kind of three-piece suit with a pair of glasses, you know, rubbing my beard, going, you know, like your traditional psychoanalyst. You know, if you kind of want that kind of person, that's not me. I'm a very down-to-earth person and very relaxed. And you know, a lot of people say my therapy is too friendly, but you know, that's the way I would want it, and that's the way my clients want it. So that's my kind of style. So my advice would be, you know, find somebody that you feel comfortable with, because that will allow you to let your sort of barriers down and work with that person. But yeah, it's a massively powerful set of tools that we have, and why not use them for good? Because, you know, when I look round, you know, when I look round here and I look at people, there's a lot of unhappy people. You know, there's a lot of unhappy people, and it's driven by not having enough. You know, a lot of what adverts do and the government do is to create the feeling of lack, that we need more. You know, we were talking earlier about cosmetics, that, you know, you have to have the latest eyeshadow, you have to have this, you have to have this. And the reality is, you know, you don't. You know, we're okay with what we've got. And the best way is a friend of mine went travelling, and he had a very good job, a lovely house, lovely car and everything else, and he went travelling, and when he went travelling, he sold everything, and he said, you know what, it's the happiest time of my life. And now he's come back, he said, you know what, I appreciate everything so much more.
You mentioned before about meditation being a little bit similar to putting you in that trance-like state, and that's I mean, meditation is a huge thing at the moment, isn't it? It's become very fashionable, mindfulness meditation especially. Do you think that, I don't know, it's interesting that it's got such a good press, but hypnosis as a word is quite, it has that, still has that Svengali image, and that's like kind of, everyone's a bit like, oh, well, you know, what's that? Why are you doing that? Be careful is the thing, isn't it? How can it improve its image? Why is it still so bad? Is it Paul McKenna's fault?
Yes and no. I mean, Paul McKenna, you know, you look at him in the 90s, you know, the hypnotic world of Paul McKenna, which is, I think, you know, in some ways that damaged the reputation of hypnosis, because people see people being in these controlled states and then being made to do, you know, quite childish things. So I get that, but if you look back into the 1840s, the 1850s, James Esdale, who's responsible for the Esdale state, which is a very, very deep level of hypnosis, reported hundreds of operations where they didn't have general anaesthetic for people who had to have limbs removed, and all they were offered was hypnosis. And he reported hundreds of these operations where people were given the choice: do you either want to bite on this bit of wood, or would you like hypnosis while we saw your leg off? And he reported hundreds of these successful operations. So it's crazy for me, you know, for people. Some people say hypnosis doesn't exist and hypnosis is terrible, this, that and the other. You look back to the 1800s, it was incredible. But what I would say to people is, you know, if the kind of stage stuff scares you and stuff like that, then stay away from it, go and see a hypnotherapist. But if you enjoy that kind of stuff, then go and watch it and try and learn it yourself, and try and learn it for the purposes of self-hypnosis. I mean, for me, meditation is different to hypnosis. Normal meditation is where you don't think of anything and you'll set yourself what the Zen koans did, which was something like, think of the sound of one hand clapping. So it's an impossible thing to solve. And then when I actually did that, I think they're called koans, Koans. And what is the sound of the mouse that roars? I mean, I've done both of those, and you actually get what the sound of one hand clapping is. Although in conscious wakefulness you can't get that, but in this state of meditation you get it and you go, yes, I understand it. But it takes you hours of doing that to get to that stage. So what it does, it basically calms the mind and allows the unconscious, because when we're sleeping or in meditation, the unconscious mind repairs the body, sorts out everything we need to sort out, and kind of it's like a mental MOT, if you like. a mental service for the mind, really. Now, what hypnosis is and self-hypnosis is slightly different because it's guided. So guided meditation is the same as self-hypnosis. So when you're doing self-hypnosis, what you're doing is putting yourself into this trance-like state, which is very, very similar to meditation. But you're actually guiding yourself to create whatever it is you want in your mind. So you're guiding your mind maybe towards more confidence, if you're into things like The Secret and things like towards more abundance, whether that's love, whether that's finance, whether that's anything else. And all these different things. So used effectively, I think, it's a massively powerful tool and a very... It's an incredible resource for people to have, and I think in this busy world that we live in today, where we live in a world of consumerism and busyism and stuff like that. I mean, we're in the ideal place where there are people walking around in trance. We're looking at people looking at the phones. They're switched off. They're not engaged with their surroundings. Everybody's walking around like ants in this trance, but they're guided by their phones and what's around them, rather than guiding their own mind into a happier life. I mean, they're looking at things here. If I buy that dress, I'll feel happier. Whereas we could sit down and say, sit down here. If you listen to me, you'll feel happier, and you won't have to part with any money.
Yeah, I guess it's an easy way to get that high, isn't it? To get that kick that you're just looking for somebody who's making you a promise. Is whoever, whether that's what we're looking at now, Mango's front window, making you a promise about a particular lifestyle and a fashion choice, or Starbucks or whatever. This is what helped me a lot with stage fright. Was I read something that just said, when you realise that everyone in that room is looking to you to be taken in hand, kind of masterfully, and then you kind of go, oh, well, I can do that. That sounds fun, and actually that's quite nice to feel that you have that power, and it's like, oh, I'll look after them then, rather than going up and feeling like, oh shit, they're all judging me. No, they're all kind of waiting to be helped by you, and that's quite a sales technique as well, is to think in terms of selling.
Well, going back to the clan, if we think about it, the clan is all the people that are there, and if you think you've got this parental influence over those people, it's quite nice. So in terms of going back to the clans and things like that, you would be the parent of the clan, looking after them, giving that experience. So that's wonderful, because your level in the clan would go up with that. Whereas if you think, God, what happens if I get this wrong and all these people are relying on me, your level of the clan would be, oh, hang on, you've got to leave, and if you leave there's death and things like that. And I changed my perception, because I've done a hell of a lot of presentations and I do a lot of training and stuff like that, and we'll all feel anticipation, even myself, and I remember when I was teaching the blast technique to the Priory Clinic, they sent a load of their counsellors to me, because one of their counsellors trained with me and got these incredible results, and they said, we need to learn this. And they were also on the same course as one of Paul McKenna's trainers, no pressure, and 3 GPs. So I've got this room full of really educated people, really powerful people, and I'll be honest, I was feeling this anticipation, and I was thinking that I had to impress these people, and I changed my frame. So what happened is I sat down with myself and thought, no, what's important is the information that's in my head. I need to make sure that gets across to these people. That's the only important thing. It's not important how I look, it's not important what I think about myself. And I probably did the best presentation stroke training course that I've ever done, and it's about changing your frame about things. So if you're nervous, or you can feel some anticipation about something, try and change the frame and think of what is the good that you're providing for those people. One of the things people struggle with is, there are 2 things that we do. We either become externally focused or internally focused. So if somebody was internally referenced, they focus on the way they feel and the way they're coming across. So for me, when I'm internally focused, I'm thinking about how can I get this information across to the people? How can I get this wonderful stuff over to them so they have great lives? If I'm externally focused, what I'm doing is I'm looking at the audience thinking, how are they going to judge me? What do they think? And then that can influence me, because I can think, oh, that bit of movement there, did that mean they didn't like it? And this, that and the other. So I think it's good to just focus internally on what's the message, what's the behaviour that I'm doing, and how's it going to affect those other people in a positive way. And when you have come from that frame, things just become a lot easier. Basically, eye accessing cues are where the eyes flick in a direction whenever we think of things. So if somebody was set up traditionally in a normal standard eye accessing cues, as I'm looking at you, Leila, if your eyes flicked up to your left, top left, it would mean you're accessing a remembered memory, a remembered picture. if your eyes move to your bottom left down here, it would tell me that you were talking to yourself using internal dialogue. It's a great one for those parents out there who are telling their children off or remonstrating with them, and when the children's go to bottom left, trust me, your children are talking back to you in their minds. If you're experiencing a feeling, generally what people do is they look down to their right, and that's kinesthetic sensations, things they feel. If they're creating a picture, and this is where the lying comes in, people generally move their eyes up to their top right, my top left as I'm looking at you. Now, the problem with that is and Darren Brown did use it on his show, the problem with that, if you're trying to find out if somebody's lying, is it's not as effective as you think. One, because the eye accessing cues flick really quickly. It's a very, very brief fraction of the time. The eyes don't stay there long enough for you to notice. So there are other things that people do when they lie. There are other mannerisms. I'm not going to go into them now, but there are a lot of markers that you can see with people, and generally you need to see 2 or 3 markers to know for sure if they're lying. So you need a kind of base rate, but there are things you can pick up. So eye accessing cues are one, but yes, in terms of our eye accessing cues connected to trauma and the blast technique, yes. I mean, there's an algorithm in the eyes that I notice when people have trauma. Part of the process is I'm mixing up the algorithm for how your brain processes that fear. So in the same way, the metaphor I use for this is if you walk across a grassy field, eventually if you walk across the same bit a lot of times, it will carve out a path. The best way for me to explain blast is that path is your pathway to phobia and trauma. Best way to explain blast is what I do is I reseed that grass and it grows in seconds and minutes, and you can't find your way back to that trauma. I'm a real fan of rapid techniques. I don't just treat people in one session a lot of the time. I like to see people for 4 sessions. The main reason for that is once a trauma's dealt with, people generally have other things they want to work on, and also and I need an exit strategy for them. So not only do we work on the traumas, let's build that person up, let's work on the confidence and self-esteem. So not only do we get rid of the things that make them feel vulnerable, but we actually strengthen them as well. And for those of you who are interested in studying the blast, my next course is on the Saturday the 16th and the 17th of May for people who want to learn the blast technique, and you can find that on the Warwickshire School of Hypnotherapy website. But I actually teach people how to do this and how to cure these things. So no, if I were to find somebody distressed, if somebody was distressed now, I have the ability, here we are in Starbucks, that if I saw somebody was reliving a trauma, to cure that in minutes and send them on the way, knowing it's permanently cured. Whenever I train anybody, I say, you need to have skills, and that's why I'm so grateful we're working in Starbucks and not some quiet office where I've got all my notes and everything else. Because I say, when I train people, you need to be able to do this in environments like this where you have no tools. All you've got is your intelligence and your knowledge, and then you're able to cure things. And if you have that level of skill, wow, you can cure anything.
Do you ever approach people in the street or see, volunteer as a sort of helpful stranger in the way that a doctor might if they saw somebody with a physical injury? Do you?
Yeah. We used to, a couple of years ago, there used to be a friend of mine that we used to call him the social therapist, and he was a trainee of mine, and he would seek out people. I mean, I will do it whenever, if it's a friend of a friend and I'm sitting down and there's something, or I witness something, there's somebody around me and I know I can help, I have to make a judgment. Am I invading their privacy, and am I creating something that they may not want to deal with? So sometimes what I'll do is, if I feel it's okay, I'll go and approach that person and I'll do some work on them there and then, and they love it. But if obviously I've approached them and it's not appropriate, I'll give them a card and stuff like that. But yeah, there was a friend of mine that used to really, there was a technique that I use, that when you talk to somebody and you don't look them in the eye, like I said earlier, your unconscious mind is influenced by your peripheral vision. And he became really adept at this technique that I taught him, about sitting beside somebody and talking to him and influencing him in a positive way. And I remember one day we were out having a drink, and this girl had an argument with a boyfriend. He stormed off and she was really upset and stuff like this. And he said, right, I'm off. And he sat next to her and he had this conversation. I was chuckling and the girl was crying, then she wasn't crying, and then she sat up, and then she sat up some more, and then she smiled, gave him a big hug and went. And I said to him, what a nice piece of work. I'll always supervise things like that. I don't let people, I said to my friend, don't ever use it when I'm not there. I just want to make sure. And he was trained in it, so he was okay. But it was a lovely moment to witness, her going through the range of emotions. And I'm sure, she went away and they made up or did whatever they needed to do. But it's lovely, because I think those sort of situations are sometimes the best situations, because if I can catch somebody and they're revivifying the trauma at that time, that's the best time for me to work with them.
It's the way your face lights up at the thought of a traumatised person. Just need to find someone who's really bloody upset. No, but it's great, and it's great that people like you who aren't afraid of dealing with trauma and these situations exist, really. But you have got your pen out as if ready to do something, so I think we should record something live. I remember when we were in the pub, we had like pepper pots and things, and they became like parental guardians, and so it was quite interesting.
That was where we explained the different elements of the character when we were explaining transactional analysis, which is the transactional analysis was the personality, the ego states created by a psychiatrist called Eric Berne, and I find it very helpful do you remember I said the doorman of the mind? The doorman of the mind is kind of what Eric Berne would describe as the critical parent. So it's that part of us that kind of folds our arms, has a furrowed brow, and will say, I'm not going to let this person influence me. And this is the kind of doorman of the mind that stops us from being hypnotised. And this is the part that we need to kind of let go to one side, knowing that, once we do that, we can actually allow ourselves to be influenced in a positive way. So, like I said, find the right therapist for you, feel that sense of rapport that you've got, and that sense of safety and comfort and trust. And once you've got that, you can pretty much do anything else. So what we're going to do now, and we don't need to kind of explain that. I mean, if people want to have a free report for how that model works and the 5 different ego states, there's 3 ego states: parent, adult and child. What they can do is, if they go to transactionalhypnosis.co.uk, register your details, and I'll send you that free report that explains the ego states, free of charge. So what we're going to do is, I'm just going to demonstrate how the process works with Leila, if you're okay to do this.
Yeah, sure.
So, first thing I need to do is, I need to get a measure of where we are. So we walked over the bridge earlier, and I asked you what your experience was. So when you think about that now, you think about that bridge, there was the sides that had the kind of wiring on, and there was a wind blowing, wasn't there? And there was traffic moving underneath, and you looked over the side and stuff like that. So when you think about the bridge now, what's kind of picture do you get in the mind that represents the worst part of the incident? So what would you see if you...
I think it was looking over when we first sort of stepped onto the bridge, and looking down at the cars, and then also you could see really far, so there's kind of a lot of landscape, and the people looked quite small.
And what emotions did that evoke?
Just editing out a little bit of the hypnosis here to protect the innocent. Your scheduled programming will resume now.
I want you to say to yourself, I could fall. Feel your feet, feel your legs, be there. Actually imagine that you're actually there now, and tell me how bad it is between 0 and 10, with 0 being nothing at all and 10 being the worst you could ever imagine.
Like 7 or 8.
7 or 8, yeah. Good. Okay, now open your eyes. Just keep your eye on the top of the pen and just focus on the pen without moving your head. That's it. And what we're doing is we're allowing your powerful and conscious mind the opportunity to process this memory by taking the wisdom, the learning and the understanding in order to let go of anything you no longer need to hold on to. So what I'm going to ask you to do is do the same process. So I'm going to get you to imagine everything again and make it as bad as you can, and I'm going to find out what's different this time. So close your eyes. Now make that picture as real as you can. Try and make it as bad as you can and tell me what's different now.
I don't feel like actually, my legs haven't gone. When you said it before, my legs were shaking, and now they're not.
Okay.
It feels calmer.
Feels calmer?
Yeah.
What number would you give it between 0 and 10, where 0 is nothing at all, 10 is the worst you can imagine?
5 or 6.
5 or 6? Yeah. Open your eyes. Let's take that 5 or 6 and just relax. Just keep your eye on the pen. Excellent. That's it. Good. Make it as bad as you can and tell me what's different now and how do you feel? What number is it?
It's less shaky. 2.
2?
Yeah.
Good. Okay, open your eyes. Okay, now what we're going to do, we're going to install a positive phrase on this. So it's almost like, I want you to imagine, we've taken a book out of the library in your mind that was an uncomfortable book to read, and we've changed the story, we've changed the cover, and we're going to put a new cover on it with a phrase that tells you, so before, the book was called I Could Fall, or it's a picture with a terrible scene that says I could fall. But what we're going to do, we're going to put it back, processed, back into that library, with a positive phrase that tells you you're more in control, you're far more comfortable and confident, and maybe you're feeling fun and excitement. So what would be a phrase that we add to that book or that picture that would tell you it's processed, it's dealt with, and it's done?
I feel safe.
I feel safe.
Yeah.
Good. I feel safe. Now I'm going to say I feel safe out loud, and you're going to say it in your mind. Okay, so just nice and relaxed, thinking of the experience again. So just get it in your mind. Got it? Okay, focus on the pen.
We're back at the bridge, and it's quite loud, I think. But I've just been hypnotised again off record a couple of times, so I'm feeling a bit spaced out now. But I think I'm ready to face this fear. I think we're going to go for it. It doesn't look too bad now. It looks quite solid.
So we've set you up with a hypnotic anchor.
Yeah.
So if at any time you feel nervous and you need some fun and excitement, here we are looking over the edge. There's a pretty brisk breeze blowing us towards the edge.
Yeah, my legs aren't shaking. They're shaking a little bit actually, but not as much as they were before. It's quite funny how your body reacts and your mind doesn't. You see what I mean? It's kind of going, oh, this is fine.
So if you had to give it
it's
a number between 0 and 10, 10 being the worst and 0 being
I would say like a 4 maybe.
Yeah.
It's definitely better than it was. And this feels much more stable. This felt like it was moving a lot when we were here before.
And it's probably, I think,
the ground
a lot stronger than it was earlier.
Yeah.
It's rocking a bit.
Yeah, it's alright. And also I don't feel like I want to jump off. That was the other worry I had. I thought, what if you cure me too much and I'm just going to go, alright, it's an opportunity to fly.
No, I mean, healthy fear is good to keep. We want the stuff that keeps you safe. As you walk across, I mean, it's quite a long walkway, isn't it?
Yes, and you also curve, so you can't see how long it is from the outset.
Now what we'll do is we'll walk this way, and then what we'll do is we'll test your anchor, because we set up an excitement an exhilaration anchor.
Yeah.
And then see how you feel when we walk back.
Yeah.
So that would be interesting to test.
I've been programmed to experience this as I experienced the last show, which is quite good. And actually that feels a lot better.
This episode of the Hack Circus podcast is sponsored by Shedcode, a technology company run by James Jeffries. James works with the web, Arduinos, thermal printers, Raspberry Pis and steam engines. He also works with me sometimes, particularly when we were teamed up on the Happenstance residency at Sheffield Site Gallery back in 2012. If you're interested in hiring James or collaborating on a project with him, and you really should be because he's great, you can email him on james@shedcode.co.uk. You can also get in touch via editor@hackcircus.com if you'd like to contact James or sponsor an episode of this show yourself.
Such an incredible technique, and I think it's something that, if you want to experience it, feel free to contact me, or if you want to learn the technique, like I say, the training course on the 16th of May, and you can get it through the Warwickshire School of Hypnotherapy, www.wsoh.co.uk, and we'll book you in and we can teach you this technique.